This is episode 1 of the Rate of Rise live series, brought to you by Roast Magazine. And in this episode, we're talking with Perter Guilano. Well, hey everybody, my name is Chris DeFerio with Keys to the Shop, and I really appreciate you tuning in today for the inaugural episode of the Rate of Rise live series. As you may have known, or maybe not have known, over the past year, I've partnered with Roast Magazine to produce episodes called Rate of Rise, Elevated Conversations on Roasting. And we took the show to the road, literally, in Boston at the SCA's 2022 Global EXPO, and sat down with 10 amazing coffee professionals, roasters, and coffee minds to talk all about roasting, entrepreneurship, the science of roasting, and various points in between. And these conversations are concentrated doses of wisdom from some amazing people. And we get to start these conversations with the venerable Perter Guilano. Perter Guilano is the executive director of the Coffee Science Foundation and the chief research officer with the Specialty Coffee Association. We've had Perter on the show before talking about customer preferences. Great episode to listen to. And in this conversation with Perter, we're going to be talking about the SCA's new, more inclusive definition of specialty coffee, which is a fascinating conversation as we trace the evolution of the definition of specialty coffee through till today, and what this new definition, based on attributes of specialty coffee beyond just cup scores and sensory, it means for the industry, what went into this, and we get into some great back and forth considerations about what a definition does for professionals. And I know that this will be of interest to you whenever something like this happens at the level of the SCA. It makes waves, and it was a big conversation during the Expo, and so I'm really glad to kick off our Rate of Rise series with Perter. So let's get right to it. Here now is our live at the SCA Expo interview with Perter Guilano. Perter Guilano.
Yes, sir.
Welcome.
Yes,
welcome back to the podcast, I guess. It's not technically the podcast, it's SCA, and I'm excited to see you.
Great to see you, too. I mean, it's great to be in physical proximity once again. That's
yes, great. 100%. So I want to dive right in today because the buzz is about the definition of specialty coffee. The big topic is something you presented on over the course of the last couple of days here, right?
Yep, that's right.
And as the executive director of the Coffee Science Institute and also the chief research officer of the SCA, I think obviously you had a major role in this definition, or this conversation, I guess. Yeah. You can say it both ways, but I guess let's start from the beginning and talk about the ways that specialty has been defined up until now. I mean, maybe there's a bunch of definitions we don't know about or just phases. How has that gone?
So since the introduction of the term specialty coffee, 4 decades ago, people have sought to try and define it, and at the same time, others have tried to undefine it. You know what I mean? It's like as a term of art, let's say, or a trade term. There are people that have a stake in what it means and what it does and what it aspires to. Mm-hmm. And you can say that it's a very aspirational term. It's got the word special built into it, and special is a powerful word. It means something that has some sort of attention-grabbing power to it. And I think people care a lot about that. And so over the years, there have been a variety of specific technical definitions, which include, for example, an early thing was a green coffee grading standard that sought to define specialty by the number of defects that there would be in a sample of green coffee.
Right.
Which is a very useful tool at a green coffee level, but doesn't help if you're trying to understand what a cup of coffee is, specialty coffee or not, right? So there has been a joke at the SCA for years now, when are we going to get to a definition? When are we going to actually, and it's hard. It's a big challenge. But recently, you mentioned that I work in research, and it was actually research that drove us to actually buckle down and really get to it. And here's why. we were doing a study that we're about to publish on between, and what we are looking into is labor conditions on specialty coffee farms versus commercial coffee farms or commodity coffee farms. And so the researchers at Texas Tech University and Zamorano University in Honduras said, okay, you're the Specialty Coffee Association. Help us distinguish between a specialty coffee farm and a commercial coffee farm. And the existing tools did not work for that, So we had to step back and say, look, how are we going to actually do this that's usable in a research context? Okay. And that led me and my colleagues to a project of looking at the industry, looking at the terms that we use in the industry, and just as importantly, looking at the sort of academic literature on quality and how other industries sort of deal with this. And that led us to a realization about a set of insights that's based around the concept of attributes, which is that coffee, like any specialty food, has a set of attributes that are the things that make it special. And primarily that's flavor for us, right? We really focus on flavor, but it's other things too. It's where it came from, its country of origin, who produced it, how it was produced, via what process. These are all, maybe there's a certification associated with it. These are all attributes that make coffee more valuable in our marketplace, give people throughout the supply chain a deeper experience, a better, more powerful connection with it. And so we decided to focus on that.
Okay, so all those attributes that are contributing to what specialty coffee is defined as currently are things that have evolved as people have been pursuing a definition of specialty coffee for themselves at all along the value stream, right?
Right.
So it went from just the cup score of the coffee,
sure,
and Erna Knudsen talking about just coining the term specialty coffee,
right,
down to the granular level. And it feels like we're taking a higher view now of it, a more inclusive view of what specialty is.
Exactly.
Is it fair to say as I don't want to say a reaction, but a response to maybe too much exclusivity?
Well, maybe. I think I think you're right to characterize it as taking a step up in altitude, but it's really meant to be inclusive. So, for example, if you're defining specialty via a cup score,
right,
you're only talking about flavor, right?
Okay.
If you're using specialty to define a number of defects in a green coffee standard, you're only talking about a green coffee grade. What we're talking about is sort of a unifying definition that includes both the cup score and the green coffee grade and the other elements that make it special. So it's more inclusive in that sense, which is recognizing that there are multiple ways that coffee is special that accumulate and are collectively what make coffee special. Now, the nice thing about it is that, so that's one sense of kind of elevating in terms of perspective, but at the same time, especially as we've become a more global industry, and also a more diverse industry, even in the United States and Europe, especially coffee is now embracing a lot more diversity in terms of flavors that are regarded as special, coffee preparations, like, for example, temperatures. I mean, there's no more, we've gotten a lot of we have a greater access to a diversity of beverages now in the specialty coffee sort of cookbook than we've ever had,
right, right.
And so we need a more capacious definition, a broader definition that can include and celebrate that diversity and doesn't try to restrict us to a very narrow sense of what is special.
The motivation for a restriction to what was in maybe in the early years and less so now, is that out of good faith, though? Isn't that to try to make sure that there's a identifiable standard to work towards, inadvertently it turned out to be exclusive?
Yeah, I think I mean, exclusive is a tricky concept, right? Because on the one hand, it's non-inclusive by definition, right? Exclusivity is the opposite of inclusivity.
Yes.
So, but specialness has an analog with exclusivity, right? So how do you be special and sort of inclusive at the same time? And I think the answer to that is to be able to recognize good things. And I'm trying to be careful about that term, good things, because it's a value judgment. And I'm not the ultimate arbiter of what good things are, and you're not the ultimate arbiter of what good things are.
Right.
In this sense, I think what we can do is we can look to other people to help us determine what good things are by asking them, like, what do you like about coffee? What do you celebrate about coffee? And what are you willing to value more about coffee? Especially, like, and are you willing to commit more of your hard-earned money to that?
Is this consumers you're talking about?
It's
mostly?
both consumers and actors in the specialty coffee trade. So this could apply to a coffee buyer as well, like a coffee buyer for a coffee roasting company. What are the kind of coffees that a coffee buyer for a coffee roasting company would get excited about and pay a premium for?
Mm-hmm. Right.
If there's a sensory attribute, for example, fruitiness, that a coffee roaster will pay a premium for, because they care about it enough to, like, pony up. Seems to me that that's a special attribute.
Yeah. And
that makes the coffee more valuable, especially to them. And that's the sort of thing that we can recognize,
Right.
So, in other words, I used to have a saying when I was a coffee buyer, which is, I'm not buying coffees I like. I'm buying coffees that other people like,
Okay.
I'm trying to satisfy other people downstream from me. And I think that's true. I feel that way about my position now as well. I'm not here to dictate what flavors are good, what flavors are bad, what things are good, what things are bad, because we've got an entire marketplace that is doing that all the time, including consumers, but also including baristas, including coffee buyers, including coffee traders, including coffee producers.
Right. So it's democratic in a sense.
It's a little. I've been using the term populist.
Okay.
Because understanding that that's a charged word right now, but it does respect people's choices.
Okay. So not being so restrictive as to say we don't want to hear from you, but then being special enough to say that there's a point at which somebody says, I like this about coffee, and the distinction between a commodity coffee and a specialty coffee, at least in a sensory attribute, which for a consumer would be pretty much the only way outside of value judgments about the ethics behind the supply chain, right?
Right.
Future generations of people might value something about coffee that today we would be like, oh my gosh, that's not specialty. That particular flavor note is actually a defect.
Right.
But there's a lot of people that I know in my family who value coffee that I personally think is pretty defective.
Right.
But to them, it's a very good thing.
Yeah.
To use that word.
Well, there's actually a classic example about this in the coffee trade, which has to do with what we call in the United States and much of Europe the Rio Defect.
Right.
And the Rio Defect, that's an old term for it. It's really a kind of defect that tastes medicinal. It's thought of as a defect. I was trained as a coffee buyer to recognize it as a defect. However, there are a couple markets in the Mediterranean region, Turkey and Greece specifically, where there are certain subsections who see that as an attribute, who see that very flavor, which a coffee buyer might reject in one country, a coffee buyer might see it as an attribute in another country.
Tricky.
Now, do we want to have an argument over whether there is absolute badness in that thing, or would we rather accept that some people can see things as an attribute while other people see it as not as a negative attribute, and understand that that's how diversity in the marketplace looks?
Okay, so why bother defining it to begin with?
Well, because I don't believe that what that example that I just gave is universal. In other words, I think that there are some flavors that are universally bad. That there are some things that no human beings are going to want to consume.
Right.
It's difficult when we're having these conversations. You tend to want to go to the extremes to like explore the idea, and I think this falls apart at the extremes. But in the middle, I think it works really well. Like for most of the coffees that we might encounter, for the vast majority of these things, I think these coffees that we work with, I think it works very well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I do think that there's a couple reasons why it's important to define things. This isn't a nihilistic kind of approach. Because what it does is it focuses on, in the definition, it's distinctive attributes. That's attributes that are recognizable, distinctive, recognizable, that bring value to coffee, right? And that's a key operational thing, that value idea. Now, value can be expressed as paying a little bit more money. Value can mean celebrating something at a barista competition or at a barista thing, but it's something that should be celebrated and that can be celebrated. Commodity is a term that sometimes we use in the specialty coffee world to be sort of a stand-in for bad coffee,
Guilty, yes.
Yeah, if we say commodity, we mean bad. But really, that's not what commodity really is in the world. What a commodity is a resource or, often a food that's interchangeable. So if we've got commodity corn, right, we've got maybe 3 or 4 lots of corn, and you can't tell the difference. And that's a good thing for a producer of cornflakes, right? Because they want consistency, and what they get is a certain grade of indistinguishable. So it doesn't matter if it comes from Iowa or Canada or China, this corn. If it's a commodity, it's interchangeable, And that is the opposite of specialty. A specialty corn would be a cool, indigenous Native American corn that's multicolored from Arizona, or like a really cool hard variety of popcorn from Canada or something like that. Those are special. And so those are distinctive from each other. And that's what Erna Knudsen was talking about when she talked about specialty coffee in 1972. She was making the comparison to like cheese shops, specialty cheese shops, which I'm sure you've been to a cheese shop and you see all different kinds of cheese from different places, different flavors, all this diversity. And that's the fundamentals on which the specialty coffee trade was built. Different countries of origin, different flavors, different histories, different people. And when those things are beautiful, those are the things that we want to celebrate. And that's what this definition is focused on.
Right.
Like recognizing those attributes that make coffee different and valuable.
Right.
And when a coffee has a lot of those things, that's when it becomes a specialty coffee.
A lot of people, and I talked with Kat Nolte Ferguson of Sukafina about risk mitigation and finding coffees that can stand in for others in blends. And we have a revival of blends. I'm super happy about it because I've always loved blends. And also coffees that need a home that we've been a little bit too exclusive about. Where lower 80s scoring coffees that we've been kind of rejecting because we want to be specialty.
Right.
And so when you're talking about the, I guess the lack of interchangeability as an attribute of specialty, how does that balance with the necessity to have some interchangeability in blends?
Yeah. Well, I guess this is the place where we can get into the weeds about blending, But when I was taught to blend coffee, the technique is to, great coffees are complex in their flavor. You may have, classically, I'm going to use some language from Illy coffee, because they talk about the toast note and the fruit note and the floral note and the, and great blends have that, right? You can see these blends that might aspire to a combination of fruits and nuts, or a dark chocolate note accompanied by a caramel note or something like that. This is what blends are like. When you do that blending from a green coffee perspective, you have to go out and source the coffee to bring you the nut note or the fruit note or the whatever note, So blends, which are managed to be consistent in their flavors, are often, by design, mixtures of constituent coffees that are distinctive in their characteristics.
Right. Okay.
So this is how distinctive coffees fit into the paradigm that you're talking about. Now, is there a place for coffees? I would say yes, there is. But in general, coffees, the things that make them special are not just them being coffees. They also are from a place, they have a story, et cetera.
Yeah.
And that's where the extrinsic attributes come into play,
Yeah.
But, I would say a coffee offered without any context in sort of bulk, generic thing, that would be the definition of a non-specialty coffee.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And that's okay. There's a place in our market for that. And even specialty companies often trade in those kinds of coffees, That's okay. We're just trying to set some definitions around how we can recognize different things in the market and in order to the other thing about a definition that I think is important, and that is I think the source of some of the discussion about this, is we're not here to set a rule for the industry to follow.
Okay.
We're not making laws, In fact, this is a descriptive definition. We're describing what the market is already doing, what the market is what specialty is in its practice. We don't see ourselves as being the regulators of the specialty coffee industry.
Okay.
And we never have. Sometimes people think we do, but we really don't. Our job is to describe and celebrate and support the specialty coffee industry, not to regulate it. And so I think some people sometimes think that when we publish a definition, it's meant to include and exclude people. It's not. It's meant to describe this phenomenon.
And yeah, exactly. And it's hard to be in the position you're in as an entity that is looked to, because we always look for an authority,
right, to
help us get over the hump of maybe an insecurity we have about our own place in the industry. And if we're, a specialty coffee roaster, we're like, well, that's the association, and we're going to look to whatever they say, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I understand what you're saying, and especially now with people are celebrating a wider variety of coffees.
Right.
You're reflecting what's already happening.
Right.
And this is flexible.
Right.
So 10 years from now, you might include a wider variety.
Right.
But that would be based on what the people are doing, not necessarily what you're doing.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
So, yeah, what is the practical application of this particular definition for roasters? What do you think it would do for the way that they operate day in and day out that would be different than the way they have?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing that every day that roasters have to deal with every day is they want to, one of the things that comes up is somebody at some point will come up and ask you, okay, what does this term actually mean, specialty coffee? What are you talking about? It happens to me when I tell I meet my kids' friends' parents, and they ask me what I do, and I have to say that I work for the Specialty Coffee Association, and they say, what is specialty coffee? And the way, if in a quick conversation, the way I respond to that is, we're the good coffee people. And the term good is intentionally ambiguous in that sense. It implies good flavor. It also means doing good in the world, It also implies goodness, but it doesn't specify what that goodness is. And I like that because it includes a lot of the different ways that coffee can be good. It can do good in the world in sort of like a sense of like for example, something I really valued as a barista is when I would make a specialty coffee for somebody in the morning, if they were having a hard day, it would make their life a little bit better that morning.
Right.
That's a good thing in the world. And that's part of the specialty coffee story. When a coffee farmer produces coffee and gets a premium for that and their livelihood is enhanced, that's a good thing. These are multiple different ways that coffee can be good that aren't just tastes good. It's inclusive of taste good. Taste good is one way that people think I'm talking about when I say we're the good coffee people. But coffee can be good in other ways too. And I think that it leaves room for independent coffee companies to explain to consumers how they, as a company, are contributing to good coffee. And that's different, right? There are some coffee companies whose mission is socially oriented. You know, they're using coffee as a tool to affect social change. That's great. That's making coffee better. Some people are just committed, focused on the flavor. That's what they're doing. They're delivering flavor excitement to people, and that's how they're making coffee better. Some coffee shops are really focused around community, right? They're serving their community by creating a space and using coffee as a vehicle for that. Those are three different things that completely different from each other, but all are good things that are coming from coffee based on coffee's good attributes. Coffee has good sensory and flavor attributes. Coffee has good economic attributes when it's traded the right way, and coffee has a coffee house. The coffee space creates a good social environment for a community to gather in. So those are three very distinct but mutually supportive attributes that coffee has.
When you're talking about that, I feel as though there's a lot of charitable assumption happening toward operators that they're not going to try to just get one of those things right and screw the rest of it.
Oh, right.
But I would, if I was an operator, want to do all three.
Sure.
And that is a self-regulated industry where you're trusting in the nature of people who are in this industry to want to do good, and you don't have to have as narrow a definition to force them to do it.
Right. That's right.
Okay.
And you know, first of all, forcing people, it doesn't work. You know, I mean, that's not my role, and I wouldn't want to do it even if it was. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's in any of us to want to regulate each other on telling them what's good and enforcing them on their failures. You know, you're not your ambiance in your cafe isn't good enough, so you can't call yourself specialty anymore. You know, that would be ridiculous. Things like the market help with that. You know, I mean. But by the way, I do think that it's a lesson worth learning, and I feel like you and I have chatted about this before, that a company in the specialty coffee environment that focuses on their strengths means that they don't need to do everything. You don't need to be everything to everybody, and that's kind of a hallmark of diversity too. Like, here's an example that I think is very relevant to this expanded idea of specialty. One of the things that's really moved me recently is I live in Southern California, and now coffee shops are different from each other in very interesting ways. So there's one that I'm thinking of. It's called Black Dot Coffee. It's very focused on Vietnamese coffee. They don't have an espresso machine. They've got bubblers filled up with different kinds of Vietnamese coffee. It's only cold coffee. You can only get Vietnamese style coffee, and it's awesome. You know, and I'm sure every day somebody comes up into that thing and says, "Can I get a cafe latte?" And they have to say, "Sorry, we don't have that, but here's what we do have, and we do really well." And they're succeeding. And you know, there's a big difference between, you know, I'm thinking of a very like customer friendly service oriented coffee shop and a very high end elite like culinary style coffee shop. Those are very different places, but those can both be successful on their own terms. And I think that's what a really thriving industry looks like, where there's lots of choices that people have. You can go to a super friendly coffee shop in the morning and a super culinary one in the afternoon, and that's great. And to me, that's what our community is starting to look like now. And I'm on the side of celebrating that, not
Right,
trying to
right.
not trying to ratchet it down and narrow that down.
Yeah. I've mentioned this with other guests, but it's like that genetic diversity that we value in the plant of coffee is something that we also want for the expressions of coffee
Right.
in our community, right?
Yeah. From a cultural perspective, that's cultural diversity.
Yeah.
And that makes our lives better. It
Absolutely.
really does. And then that's even more true as we seek to include coffee cultures in other places. And in some countries, they're just emerging. I was reading a study last week, it was a study about specialty coffee consumers in Thailand. That's a relatively young specialty coffee scene, but they're already doing academic consumer research. And these consumers, I can tell you, based on this research, have different preferences than consumers in the United States would have. That is so okay with me. It would be boring and it would be kind of sad if we expected in Thailand, especially coffee consumers, to have identical preferences to coffee consumers in Austin, Texas, or Berlin, Germany.
Yeah.
That would suck. So we have to make room, I think, as an industry for different interpretations of specialty coffee that correspond with cultural differences that we love already.
You keep it special.
Yeah, exactly. That's what specialty is all about. Yeah.
Peter, it was wonderful to talk to you again. I appreciate your time today, and I hope you have a good rest of your expo.
Thank you. It's great to talk with you always.
All right, everybody. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. And we kept it to 30 minutes, but you know that this conversation needs to keep on going. And I hope that you and your industry peers and your coworkers will continue to talk about this subject. And maybe some of the things that Peter brought up and that we discussed will help spark some thoughts and help guide you as you pursue specialty coffee. And these definitions continue to be a conversation amongst us in the specialty coffee industry. So a huge thank you to Perter Guilano for taking time out of a very busy schedule for him during Expo to sit down with us and talk about the definition of specialty coffee. We really appreciate you, Peter. And you can find links in the show notes of this episode that will direct you to the SCA's definition as we were discussing it, as well as Peter's past episode on Keys to the Shop. Now, Roast Magazine is one of the longest running and most respected trade journals in the coffee industry. They're not only publishing this amazing resource of a magazine that keeps you up to date with knowledge and insights from scientists, subject matter experts, professionals in roasting across the global industry, but also they're producing books like Green Coffee by Chris Kornman, Cheap Coffee by Carl Weinhold, and the Book of Roast, etc. I mean, they are a powerhouse of providing resource for the roasting industry, and you really should be subscribed to Roast Magazine. Go to roastmagazine.com to check that out. You can get $5 off your subscription by using the code ROR when you subscribe. Again, I can't speak highly enough for Roast Magazine. Go subscribe today over at roastmagazine.com. And with that, that is the end of this first episode. We've released 2 other episodes in tandem with this Friday in May the 13th. And I would encourage you to tune into those as well. In episode 2, we get to talk with Aurelie Barrera Grodsky, who is the founder and owner of Little Waves Coffee, winner of the Micro Roaster of the Year Award from Roast Magazine. And then in episode 3, we're talking with Carl Weinhold, who is a coffee researcher, as well as the author of the book Cheap Coffee. We've also had Carl on the show prior. And so those are great interviews to tune into next. They're out right now. You can also find these conversations at the Roast Magazine website at roastmagazine.com and also at the Roast Magazine YouTube channel. So not only can you hear this on the Keys to the Shop podcast, but also you can view the conversations happening in all their glory over at the Roast Magazine YouTube channel. So I encourage you to do that as well. Thank you everybody for joining me today. Don't forget to subscribe to Roast Magazine. And as always, I hope that today's conversation has truly given you keys to the shop.